I was Byron's first follower on Clubhouse. Proud of that one. And there is Zanele. Welcome. Welcome to the Better Conversations Club.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Zanele. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you? How are you both?
We're both well. Well, I'll speak for myself. I am well. Jessica, how are you doing?
I am good. I'm just getting some paper out because I like to listen while I write. I like to write, listen. So give me 1 sec. I'll pass the mic over to you, Keith.
Sorry, I was just bringing people into the room. Okay, so folks who are new to our room, oh, um, I think I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. This is our Friday conversation. Today we're going to be focusing on unlearning and better conversations, and we have a wonderful guest today, Zanele Njapha. Zanele, did I get your name correct? Let's start there.
You were close, Keita. It's
Close.
Zanele Njapha.
Zanele Njapha. Did I get it there? Okay. You're flashing your mic, so I'm taking that as a yes. Jessica, want to get us
Hello.
started for today's session? Set some context?
Yes,
I'm going to
yes,
go
yes,
invite
yes.
some people.
All right. So this is our Friday room. I love these rooms. They're quick. They're 1 hour, and we do try to honor the hard stop at an hour. And on Fridays, the reason why I love Fridays is because we get to kind of sit back and learn from somebody amazing on how we can think differently, expand our lenses around how we're showing up in our conversations and how we can do that better. So today we've invited Zanele because she is the unlearning lady, and I've already learned so much just in preparation for today's talk because I've been watching your YouTube videos, Zanele, and learning about unlearning, which has been fascinating journey. I had not actually looked into this before, and it's opened my mind to a whole bunch of thoughts on what I might need to unlearn myself in order to relearn how to have better conversations. So, we're really excited to talk. We're going to start off actually by asking you just to sort of set the intentions for the room. So, suppose this was a really useful hour for everyone listening in. What would you hope that they might, walk away with or walk away thinking a little bit more about?
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you, Keita, for having me. It's lovely to be here with all of these amazing people. So I would say if there were any objectives or intentions for the room, I would say that this is an hour to get self-disrupted or to self-disrupt. I often say that as the world is consistently disrupting on us, or there are factors that are acting on us, the best thing that we can do is self-disrupt in response to that. And so this is just going to be an hour of us looking into how we can self-disrupt or disrupt from the inside. So I hope that didn't sound too fluffy, but that would definitely be my biggest intention for our session today.
I love that. I love the idea of self-disrupting. One of our biggest intentions for this project, the Keita and I have co-founded the Better Conversations Project, which is what led us to Clubhouse and holding these rooms in the first place, is this idea of really looking inward, really challenging our underlying assumptions about how we're showing up and what effect that has. So I am really excited to learn more about self-disrupting. So just to quickly outline for those of you that are new to our Friday rooms, Keita and I are going to have a conversation with Zanele up here for about, and then we'll invite anyone who would like to raise their hand and have any questions for Zanele to please come up on stage around the halfway mark. So if there's anything you're curious about, keep it in mind, jot it down, feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring you up and we will invite you into the conversation around the 30-minute mark because we like to explore our own curiosities for the first little bit. So with that, Keita, I'll pass the mic over to you, and I'm also going to make you a mod.
I have my first question for our wonderful guest is, can you tell me what you mean by self-disrupting or self-disruption? I just have to ask that question because I have a podcast called Disruptive Conversation, so I'm very curious about what you mean by that.
Cool, Keita. That's a very good question. Okay, so self-disrupting is in essence, firstly, like Jessica, I love when you said something around awareness. And I think that that's what self-disruption is for me. Self-disruption is all about taking a space or taking a position of awareness in ourselves around, firstly, what all of our biases are, what all of our preconceived perceptions are about the things that we're looking at, the things that we're perceiving, the things that we're aware of, and then taking a stance to question that. So rather than allowing external circumstances to be what's acting on us consistently, self disruption would even start with something like asking ourselves the questions and raising our level of awareness around why we perceive what we perceive the way we perceive it, to say quite a lot there. It's almost like taking a back seat to your own thinking. So think about yourself as an observer or as the individual who's actioning whatever it is that you're seeing, whatever you're acting as, whatever you're doing in your own life, however you are contributing. And the self-disrupting is almost seeing yourself as the person behind yourself who's consistently observing, questioning the way you're acting. As you do things, as you perceive things, it's like that second window or second person behind you that goes, that's interesting that you chose to make that decision. What might have led you there? Or what are the circumstances that may have contributed to that? What are some of the themes we're picking up here? What are the patterns that are present in this? And then the self-disruption part, or at least more of it, then comes in the action where you almost pattern interrupt. And that really is what the self-disruption is about. It's about raising your level of awareness around what is going on in your level of awareness, and then choosing to disrupt that pattern by shifting that thinking. Now, it's not easy work, but that is in essence what I would say self-disruption is. And the funny thing is, Keita, around that question is that a lot of people will go, oh my goodness, unlearning is so challenging. But I often like to say that unlearning is nothing out of the ordinary. Unlearning and relearning really is how the brain learns. If we look at how our brains are consistently creating new hypotheses around the things we know, around the things around us, making sense of the things around us, it is through a process of unlearning and relearning. And I often give the example of a little girl, for example. Let's just take a little girl for argument's sake, who grows up with a dog in her family home. The perceptions that she has around a dog, or the conclusion she makes in her brain around a dog, is that a dog has that cute little snouty nose, those cute ears, it's fluffy, it loves to sleep in my bed, it's really friendly. And then one day she takes a trip to the zoo, for example, or somewhere where she encounters a wild dog. What happens in the mind of the girl as soon as she sees it bark or bite someone or not act so friendly is that she goes, oh my goodness, there's a dissonance there, or there's some kind of clash going on here. And then what the brain will do is it will reconstruct and almost create these new neural pathways to respond to the new situation. And that really is what self-disrupting and unlearning is all about.
Ooh.
Um,
Keita, go ahead.
yeah, awesome. First of all, you're one of the few people who pronounces my name Keita, so thank you for that. You are clearly have influence somewhere in Central Africa, or you know that name Keita very well, or Keita. So that's the first thing, and then secondly, can we dive in a little bit deeper on what do you mean by what's the connection between unlearning and self-disrupting? And let's dive into that connection a little bit.
Sure, that's definitely a good question. So I would say the two are not different at all. So let's go right back to the idea of learning. And let me actually tell you where the idea of self-disruption came in. I had a conversation with a few clients. I was speaking as part of an Africa forum for this one organization. And I asked these individuals that were in the room, these corporate individuals that were looking to almost disrupt their industry, and they're part of the IT industry. And I said, what does unlearning mean to you? What would unlearning look like? If you were to replace the word unlearning with another term that feels more familiar to you, what would that be? And then one gentleman stood up and he said, you know what, Zanele, for me, it would be self-disrupting. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant, because that's in essence what it is. And so that's why I took on that term, because with the understanding around the formation of new neural pathways and all of the patterns around understanding our behaviors, understanding our surroundings as individuals, it made sense that that's what unlearning was. Because, and I think that this is one of the best ways that this comes in here, is when we understand the neuroscience of learning, which is, like I said, creating these new hypotheses or these new neural pathways, that once we introduce something new, there's a higher chance chance that an older pattern that's less used almost starts to prune in the brain. You may have heard of Hebb's law that says cells that fire together hardwire together. So the more that those cells fire and you're consistently using the same pattern of thinking, exercising the same level of awareness, all of the other structures or all of the other neural connections that haven't been used or have been neglected do tend to fire a little less. And we almost create these new defaults around what we do. And that's why habit formation and creating behavior change becomes so challenging, because we do have some of these other more dominant ways of thinking, dominant ways of seeing things. And you can almost think of them like tarred pathways in your brain. And so the unlearning is just all about creating a new path and disrupting where there wasn't once a path, if you can think about it like that. Think about how sometimes when we're on maybe a park and you have the park that's been paved for everyone to walk on, but people just choose to walk on the grass and create their own path. And then you start to see this little walkway that's been created by people. And that's really what unlearning and self-disrupting is all about. It's about creating this new path and disrupting where there once wasn't a path, so that you almost rewire your surroundings altogether. So that would be the connection for me, Keita.
Okay, I'm going to take a breath here for a sec because you have given us so much information in these first 10 minutes. I want to sit and digest, and I want to give everyone a chance who's listening in to sit and digest as well. Wow, Zanele, I love everything you've given us so far. I love how you've taken us from that first step of increasing the awareness around our patterns and then disrupting the pattern through action. And then you took us into this distinction between learning and unlearning. So I'm gonna reflect back what I've heard, and then please correct me if I'm not getting this right, because I want to just slow it down for a second, digest this. So when you're learning something, you're creating new neural pathways. And then when you're unlearning something, you're actually trying to disrupt like the very dominant pathways that are already there. Is that a correct? Does that make sense so far? So
Yes,
maybe
yes, it really does.
can we take it back maybe a little step to sort of slice that a little thinner to really get that distinction? Because I think for me, when I first heard the concept of unlearning, I was like, well, what's the real difference, like in day-to-day life, between learning something and unlearning something? And you've given us some great examples of unlearning with the girl and the dog. Maybe if you could even bring us down to a little bit even more fundamental, like basic definition of like what is the difference between learning, unlearning, and relearning.
Cool. Thanks, Jessica. So I think it gets very confusing when you split the three. And so I always say that learning is literally a process of unlearning and relearning. Now, I know that the same word is in unlearning as is in relearning. So you go, oh my goodness, how are these really the same thing? But it really is the same thing. And so if we go right back to the example of the little girl with the dog, what happens, and this is especially between the ages of 0 and 7, you and I get our most basic, if you can think about it as foundational ideas around who we are, around what our world is, who your parents are, what that feels like, and just some of the basic ideas around navigating your surroundings. And now that would be almost creating this framework, and you almost get these definitions formed in your head. And then as you move out further into the world, what happens is those hypotheses are being tested. And so as new information comes in that almost contradicts or questions what you already know, a process then of unlearning the perception that you had starts. And then you relearn something new. So for example, if we go right back to the little girl, what would happen in her mind, or what happens in the brain, is that she would go, okay, that's interesting. This looks like a dog. It might even feel like a dog, but it's not acting the way that I've always perceived dogs to act. And then what the brain would do is almost reshuffle and add almost new neural pathways that speak to, okay, so what are the differences then between this dog and the one that I saw before? Does that mean dogs come in different types? Okay, so maybe when the color is different, that means it acts differently. And I think the really important thing to understand is that with the human brain, goodness, all of these neural pathways are so complexly interrelated. And so when your brain thinks about one thing, it doesn't just fire in one part of the brain, but it fires in so many different parts of the brain, the parts that are associated with color and shape and movement. And all of them come together to form one idea. So when you say dog, when I say dog, or let me give you an example, when I say purple elephant to everyone right now, it's firing in all different parts of your brain, and then your brain says, there we go, there's a purple elephant. But it's called from different parts, around the size of the elephant, around what it looks like, where the ears are, the color, and all of those things. And so when we unlearn or we disrupt ourselves, all we're doing is we're saying to our brains, okay, we've got a new piece of information that's contrary or contradictory, or maybe just dislike or unlike rather what we've had before. Where do we place this? Does this mean we almost create a new category? Does this mean we rearrange the structure altogether? Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe an elephant doesn't actually look what I thought it looked like. And it's just that recalibration. And so without even knowing it, Jessica, you and I are unlearning all of the time. It's just how the brain works. But what I always encourage is that let's rather be a little bit intentional then. If we know that something is not serving us, let's be a little bit intentional about the unlearning process, and sort of take that into our own hands and be a little bit more active about it.
Kita, go ahead. I wasn't sure if you were unmiking
No,
there.
you go ahead. You go ahead. I was.
Okay. Um, okay. I'm like, wow, there's so much. This is amazing. I feel like I can ask you questions for hours. So here's what I'm getting curious about is how do we start to be more intentional about this unlearning process? Our brain is doing this all the time. It's pruning, it's connecting, it's, redirecting. How do we actually day-to-day life, because my what I would imagine, I'm just thinking for myself here, is that yes, new information comes in that contradicts what I know, and I think the most natural reaction, other than what's happening automatically, is to push that away. And I think we see a lot of examples of that. It's hard, it's intimidating, it's scary, or whatever, to really embrace new information that really fundamentally contradicts the way that you are understanding the world. So what is the process to help us do this a little bit more openly or a little bit more intentionally, to really intentionally unlearn something that is contradicting our fundamental um, view or worldview or lens?
That's a great question, Jessica. And as you were saying or giving an example around yourself, you reminded me of this case study. So there was a piece of research or a study actually done in the United States. And what they did is they took a group of Republicans, and they took some Democrats, and they had them follow a Twitter bot. So the study was done on Twitter, and these people were paid. So they were paid to follow a Twitter bot on Twitter, as you can obviously guess. But what was happening is that the Twitter bot was consistently tweeting on information that was so contrary to what these people believed. So if they were conservative, the Twitter bot was posting very liberal conversations and tweets, and it was ongoing. And for the other side, it was exactly the same. And they wanted to find out, the aim of the study was to find out, what does it take to get a person to move out of their comfort zone, especially when they are exposed to something extremely polarized to what they already believed. And so they did this. These people followed these Twitter bots for some time. And then once they went back into the data, and they had a look at whether these people had changed their perceptions around how they saw the world and how they saw themselves, what they actually found, and this is the really interesting thing, Jessica, that I think you were talking about, what they actually found is that people moved further in than moving out. And so your Democrats became even more liberal than before. Your Republicans, sorry, became even more liberal than before. And your Democrats became even more conservative than they were before. Other way around, sorry, I'm getting it all mixed up. But they became even further, they moved further into what they previously believed. And that's what I thought was quite interesting around the conversation, because we would think that if we were exposed to something contrary, we would eventually move in. But what was happening there, Jessica, is that the information that we consume when we try to change and unlearn our behaviors can sometimes be so contrary. And this is why I often say I love affirmations, but I think a lot of the time they can be to our detriment, because what we often do is we expose ourselves to something completely contrary from what we believe, that it scares our brains right backwards and falls into what's been called your region of rejection. So if you think about a circle around yourself, and this is just one quick example around it, if you think about a circle around yourself that's around 5 meters or so radius, that would be what we call your zone of acceptance. And it's not really 5 meters, but this is just an example to keep it nice and practical. That would be your zone of acceptance. It means anything that falls within that 5 meter radius, you're willing to accept. So, for example, if I love ice cream and someone comes to me and they go, oh my goodness, I absolutely hate ice cream, that person wouldn't fall within my zone of acceptance, but they would fall in my region of rejection. And so the region of rejection is the part outside of your zone of acceptance, where it seems almost extremely polarized to what you believe. But if someone came to me and they said, I'm not the biggest fan of ice cream, but I will definitely do chocolate ice cream any day, then that person falls within my zone of acceptance. And I've got a higher chance of not just befriending that person, but also I've got a higher chance of accepting that person's view or allowing them to change my own perception. So that's the first thing that I thought I wanted to say in response to what you were saying, that I thought was just so brilliant. And so in response to that, what we can do then is starting off with the awareness. And we spoke about this. You outlined my entire process, Jessica, which I thought was so strange. So starting with with the awareness and then going into the action. But I'm super I'm super obsessed with keeping it up, because I work a lot in transitioning and behavior change and really getting transitions to stick. And so the big thing for me in response to that study we spoke about with the zone of acceptance and the region of rejection is chunk it up. Once you have that level of awareness and you've used a method like questioning to figure out where your patterns are, what are the consistent ways of thinking that are there, and the reason why questioning works so well here is because it helps you to pick up what might be below the surface that you're not immediately aware of. So asking questions like, when I was faced with a situation similar to this, how did I respond? When I had a conversation with my mother last time and she spoke about my father, what was my response? And just consistently being in a state of asking ourselves internal questions about our responses, about our perceptions. Because what we don't realize, and this is a piece of interesting data from Stanford University, is that the average human being thinks about 60,000 thoughts, but they found that 90% of them are the same thoughts that we thought yesterday. So you and I think we're living 60 beautiful years, but we're just living 30 years twice. And it's just this consistent thing, because due to the brain being a pattern matching organism, it's consistently matching what it's done yesterday with what it's doing today. And so if you were faced with a situation yesterday that conjured up a particular idea or thought pattern from you, you're going to respond with the same words that are followed by the same emotions or feelings that then add up to the same actions. And you come into a situation that's very similar today. You think, oh no, I'm a brand new Jessica. I'm handling this in a brand new way. And it turns out what you are doing is you're literally replicating what you did yesterday. And I think that that is so profound. And so that's what this responds to. This strategy of questioning helps you almost go, something's going on here. Yesterday, when I had a conversation with my boyfriend around money, I said the exact same thing. Something is going on here. And when we ask those questions, it helps us to raise our level of awareness around the things we may not be so aware of that are not necessarily on the surface. And then the big thing that I'm going to end off this question with, that I think was quite important, especially relating to that zone of rejection and region of acceptance, or zone of acceptance and region of rejection, was chunking it up. When we unlearn, we need to take our journey of unlearning one step at a time, but always starting what we want to relearn. Because I get a lot of people who go, Zanele, I'm trying to unlearn this particular habit. I'm trying to unlearn this behavior change, but it's not working. And The problem a lot of the time is with our focus. When our focus is on relearning or learning, then it takes on almost this very positive forward driving force. It's what Les Brown used to say, the pull of the future is stronger than the push of the past. You really want to have that idea of what you want to learn, be the thing that's driving you. And then the unlearning, like I think you were mentioning a little bit earlier on, Jessica and Kata, you may have touched on this too, is that then the unlearning almost becomes what happens by default as a result of the learning that's taking place. So chunking our learning up into little meaningful bits. Set little targets for yourself that spread out between today and maybe next week or in the next month or 2 months' time, that you can track, that you can build a kind of momentum around, so that it's not this huge mammoth goal. I want to completely unlearning smoking cigarettes by the end of the year. Goodness, that's going to frighten your brain, and it's going to keep reminding you of the times you've tried it and it hasn't worked. So you want to just set these tiny goals that you can manage, that are not intimidating, every now and again around what you want to relearn rather than what you want to unlearn. So it's almost flipping the script and self-disrupting just the way we see things altogether, that helps us to rebuild those habits. I hope that was helpful.
That was incredibly helpful, and I want to comment on it, but I want to give Kita a chance to ask a question too. So Kita, I'll pass you the mic first, and thank you.
Just, I think we should reset the room before we do that. You
Okay,
mind resetting the
yeah,
room?
go for yeah, sure. So hey everyone, wow, my mind is being blown. I'm learning so much. We are talking with Zanele Njapha. It's Njapha, yeah? Njapha. Thank you. I was practicing. Um, about unlearning, the difference between unlearning, relearning, and how this can help us really self-disrupt, better self-disrupt to show up more intentionally, especially as related to our conversation. So we're about halfway in, 30 minutes in. We'll be going for a full hour. And we will open the stage soon to anyone who has any questions for Zanele. So feel free to raise your hand. I do see Mello. I see you. We'll be bringing you up in a minute. And I just really wanted to focus on what Zanele was saying. And yeah, we'll be going for another 30 minutes. So any questions you might have, it is your chance coming up soon. Raise your hand. And Kita, I will pass that over to you.
Thanks, Jess. The only comment that I have, when you initially talked about unlearning and you gave the story of the girl, I immediately thought about that double down effect that happens. So when people get information that contradicts their their existing beliefs, they tend to double down on their existing beliefs. So I began to get very curious about how that works in the process of unlearning. So I just was really grateful that you brought up that research, that Twitter research, because it is a common thing where people don't realize that by actually presenting counterfacts, you actually have people double down on their existing beliefs. So I just, that was what I found curious. So, Jess, do you want to ask a question?
Um, I just want to pause again and digest the material a bit because there's so much coming out here, and I just want to make sure that everyone listening in also has a chance to do that. So, what I really appreciated about what you said there, Zanelli, was this 5 meter radius gave me a great visual of that zone of acceptance and that region of rejection. And I thought also, as to what you just said, Kita, about that Twitter research was so fascinating because I thought you were going to say that the more people were exposed to the opposite point of view, the more they started leaning into that or opening up to that. So it's so counterintuitive, but yet not, now that I actually think about it, that people actually got firmer in their own beliefs when exposed to the opposite point of view. Because I was like, oh, that's brilliant. Why don't we just change all the algorithms around, you know, to feed us all, to break our echo chambers open, and we'll all, be able to open our lenses up a little bit. There's an easy way to promote world peace. Um, but not. So that was fascinating research. And then what I also really appreciated was you bringing it down to these really small steps of like, what is it that I want to relearn first? Because in focusing on that quote you said, the pull of the future is stronger than the push of the past. I mean, that is fundamental to what I also believe. Kita and I are both solution focused practitioners, so I can speak safely on behalf of both of us that we, very much believe in that pull of the future and that moving into that emerging future or that preferred future and really getting grounded in that as a very forward moving pull. So I love what you said about that awareness around what it is that we want to relearn as a focus, which naturally then also helps us to unlearn. Because I think it's a bit daunting to say, well, oh my God, how do I unlearn this? I mean, as soon as you think about that white bear, you're focused on the white bear, right? So I thought that was a beautiful reframing and then reminding us to just take those small steps. It's one small step. What is something that I would like to relearn? And how do I then focus on that? So just to kind of recap those are what really stood out for me. I love everything you're sharing with us so far. This is brilliant. And one more thing that I love, that Stanford study that you mentioned. And I'm reiterating all of this because you said there was so much information in what you shared. So I'm just kind of teasing out some of the things that stood out for everyone listening in, if this is helpful. That we have 60,000 thoughts, but 90% are the same as yesterday. I mean, how fascinating is that? Every day we think we're anew, but really we're kind of just reiterating our same patterns over and over again. So how do we bring awareness to that? I mean, even just hearing that study is helping me bring awareness to my own thought patterns. So that was so useful. Welcome to the stage, Mello. Welcome, John. A reminder to anyone else, usually we only have time for, a handful of questions. So if you have a burning question for Zanele, feel free to raise your hand and join us up here. And Kita, if you don't have another burning question right now, I might pass the mic over to Mello. What are you thinking, Kita?
Pass the mic. Looking forward to hear what Mello has to say.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Jessica. Hi, Kita. Hi, Zanele. I really appreciate everything that you shared. I feel that my mind is very much blown as well. Jessica, sort of towards what Jessica was getting at there is like trying to understand the sort of way that this works itself out, these fixed positions. I think, and the practical side of that. So, like, what I automatically think about are the obvious. And you mentioned the political piece, and politics and religion are the two things you never talk about. And I kind of wonder that if I wonder about the priorities of the particulars. So, for instance, humans, like all humans, the dignity and the respect of all humans. If this is the foundational sort of prioritization, do you think that things like that, if we had a few of those, I mean, I'm kind of giving you the solution to my question in the question, but I'm curious what you would say about that. And do you think that that makes sense to prioritize, find the commonalities in the priorities? If we had a few of them that we could agree on, perhaps that could help us bust up some of these fixed, settled positions in some of the hardest, most deeply seated sort of emotional ties to the things that we love. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm really excited to hear your.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Milo, for taking the time, and hello to those wonderful children that you have in your background. I love that you mentioned emotions and goodness. Don't emotions just make everything that much more complicated? And it turns out that the hippocampus will retain, or our brains rather, let me say, will retain emotions. I mean, retain memories that are attached to emotions a lot better and a lot more clearly than those that don't. And chances are that even the memories that we have have a lot of emotion attached to them are the ones that get the cloudiest. And so goodness, that is such a good question. And my response would definitely be that finding equal ground is very helpful. It's helpful for people, when, especially when it comes to having better conversations. If we can come in with the perspective of, I don't know what I don't know, or that level of consciousness, of just being consciously incompetent, as it's called, to say, I'm not too sure around what I have, but I am almost laying my cards on the table so that I can be challenged. And I heard this very interesting perception once that you've just reminded me of, Melo, that the way we go about our perceptions is quite faulty. We go about our perceptions as truth. But if you think about scientists and what hypotheses really are, is that it's a perception that you're opening up to being scrutinized. It's saying, here's my perception, let's see. Let's prove it false rather than I want to prove it true. And so I really, really loved what you said. And I think that it's very helpful to find common ground. But the complexity of the human being has just made it so, so difficult for us, especially when it comes to politics, church, I mean, religion, you've spoken about, and so many other ideas, that we do find ourselves being on two opposite ends. But it is only when we can see commonalities in each other's ideas and not feel like we have to jump over to the other side. And that's the important thing, not feeling like you have to, or you have an obligation to go all the way completely to the other side, but understanding that there is a level of truth in people's beliefs and in people's perceptions, because they only ever come from, at least this is my view. Now I'm getting a bit personal here, but I believe that each and every person's view only ever comes from their perception. And because of that, there is a level of truth there. There is this empathy we can extend, because through their eyes, through however limited they may be, that's the perception that they hold. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Melo, and what you've experienced around this yourself.
Oh, thank you for tossing it back. Yeah, it was really resonating with what you were sharing. I think that as an artist, I sort of live in the uncomfortable zone. People talk about breaking out of the comfort zone, and it's actually funny. I feel like because of so much of my life I've pushed back, that I'm trying to actually find bubbles of comfort, ironically. But yeah, I'm looking for a few additions to the common ground of humanity, because I just think that that's too broad. I think that there's ways in which these things that seem that they're divisive perhaps aren't, if we can get underneath the heart of them. And so I'm wondering about that when I think about religion and I think about politics. I think about sometimes they're too broad and overarching, and if we could sort of piece them apart, sort of pull them apart together, that perhaps we would see that we're actually onto the same things than we think that we are. But yeah, it's the curiosity of my life, I think, actually. So thanks for letting me share, and thanks for I want to share the stage.
Cool, thank you. And just one little challenge, if I was to agree but challenge that in a way, is because we get taught all of our perceptions around the things that we are used to, the things we see, the things we perceive. And I am so in agreement, especially if you speak about religion. I'm in quite, I think, intense agreement there, that there is an underlying theme there that we can all relate to, that underpins all of that. But also, if you think about it, where does that come from? And a lot of the time, if you trace back, a lot of these underlying themes around being good to others, or really the doing to others as you would have them do unto you, those are really themes that we get taught. They're man-made. And so I think that all in itself, there's just so much to unearth there. And it sounds to me like you're in the process of doing all of that. So all the best. Please let me know how far you get and how that goes.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes.
Oh, Mello, that was a great question. And Zanele, thank you so much for the way you answered that. I think for me, I just resonate so much with your quest, Mello, and your curiosities. And I really do feel that at the heart of all our polarities, or our perceived polarities, or our perceived polarized perceptions, even there is a common ground, and there's a common humanity, and there are common core needs that if we really dig into those, we'll find that I think it really comes down to the same thing. And a big part of my personal quest is helping myself and helping those around me and helping people really learn how to face into that so that we can start seeing more of that common ground, you know. So thanks for bringing that into the conversation. Keita, would you like to add to that, build on that? I'll pass the mic over to you.
Sorry, I was hitting the messaging, the back channel thing. You know what? I'm gonna save my question till after John goes. Um, there are lots of things that are coming up for me, but I want to make sure that people who come on stage make sure they get some stage time. And if we have time, I'll ask my question. John, do you wanna go?
Hi, thank you, Kita. Hi, Jessica, and Zanele. Thank you very much for this education here. Very thought-provoking and eye-opening. My question is not dissimilar to Mello's, but I'm approaching it from a. I want to look at it, perhaps utilize it from a organizational behavior aspect. And possibly think how I can leverage that uh, in my work, in the leadership aspect of my work, and that's trying to ask you perhaps some practical steps in the unlearning emotions versus unlearning processes versus unlearning of the behaviors. And you talked about the conscious incompetence, and a lot of the people we come in contact with when we want to change, there is a they are either in I encounter them to be in the unconsciously incompetent stage, or the consciously competent stage, where it's one or the other. I just wanted to ask you how can you leverage with some practical steps in shifting that from one stage to the other. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much, John, for asking that question. You've actually just gotten me a little bit excited. But what I will do is that I'll just share a framework that I developed a year ago that I've been using to work with a range of organizations, especially around organizational change. And then I'm happy to DM you an article that was recently published on Forbes that you can read about making organizational changes stick, that I wrote. And it's a punchy, little nitpicky article that you can have a look at and see if that's valuable to you. But otherwise, the framework is called the LEAP framework. LEAP, and it's all around seeing change, unlearning, and transitioning as a kind of trapeze artist journey. So if you think about a trapeze artist who's going from one way, or one swing rather, and jumping onto another swing, or jumping to a catcher's hands, that's what really happens when we engage in organizational shifts or organizational changes. And this often is the conversation I have with leaders, is understanding that it is that process. William Bridges writes so well around transitions, and he says there are really three parts to a transition. This is similar to the trapeze artist idea. He says there's the letting go, there's the neutral zone, what he calls the neutral zone in between, and then the end, which he calls the grabbing hold. But for the purposes of just this, I want you to focus on the letting go and the grabbing hold. Any single person, especially in an organization, and you spoke about people that might be conscious or unconsciously incompetent, any individual in the workplace or in a work environment is having to let go at any given time when there's a new process that's introduced, a new system, a new leader. There's always that letting go. And what I often urge leaders to do is to pay close attention to that. Because, if you go back to if you have a look at that book, Managing Transitions by William Bridges, he says that transitioning and changing are two different things. The changing is the structural parts of the shift or the organizational change, and then the transitioning is the psychological part. Because when people let go of what they've become once used to, there's a lot of psychological safety that's in question there. People are going, oh my goodness, what does the future mean to me now? What are the things I was once used to that I'm having to let go of or disassociate? And often what we find is, like, just use a random name, for example. Jason, you just jumped onto my vision, but let's say, for example, Jason is part of your team and he's going, I'm having to let go of using a previous system that we once made use of in the organization. And actually, I used to associate that system with being able to, let's say, for example, feed my children at home, because there are all of these connections that people have made with the way of doing things that almost attaches to their identity. And so that's the first thing to understand, is that people are having to let go of different things that they've associated and formed part of their identity altogether at one stage. And then there's the letting go that just all on its own is just another complex process. So the LEAP framework then is an acronym, and it's LEAP, and all made up of its own different little nuggets around each of them, but all are based around the neuroscience of change, helping people to unlearn and relearn something that's completely new while letting go of something that's become so close to their identities that they've held so dear. And so the L then is live vision. And the live vision, John, is around helping people to have the organizational vision, especially when you're introducing something new, call to them. And goodness, think about it, John. I mean, if you're a leader, you might have a really great idea on this. Do the people in your team wake up in the morning and go, oh my goodness, I can't wait to wake up in the morning and go and fulfill John's vision for life or John's purpose for living? They don't. As much as leaders, we'd like to tell ourselves that this is the case, it's not. People wake up in the morning and go, I want to fulfill my vision for life. I want to make the difference that is unique or personal to me. And so when we speak about a live vision, it's all about communicating the relearning part, or what we're going to be relearning, or what we're moving to, what we're grabbing hold of, in a way that is almost so personalized that people can feel it in the bottom of their own hearts on a one-to-one level. And this can be done in so many ways, but I often say it starts with conversations, understanding the things that wake people up in the morning so that they can make that jump. Remember earlier we spoke about the region of rejection? It's because a lot of visions in organizations fall within that. And so people don't relate it to themselves, and there's this disconnect in between their vision for themselves and their future and where they want to go and how they want to solve world hunger and how they want to make a difference with regards to climate change and where they see the organization going. So that's, I'm just going to run through the rest because I don't want to take forever on these. But E then is easy edible chunks. And we talked about this a little bit earlier on. So I've found a lot of effectiveness, John, with organizations that use tools like Gantt charts, where people are able to track their progress, because then it helps them understand that they are making some kind of change, especially the people that are pushing a lot more towards the change that's happening in organization, people that are resisting a lot of the changes that are happening and actually pushing back at leaders in a way that almost seems threatening. And so the easy edible chunks is, how do we break the change up in ways that help people to build momentum, but helps people to see that they are making progress in the right direction towards the bigger goal. And it's not just the big goal on its own. And then the A is all around communication. It's acknowledge, appreciate, and announce. And this one is so beautiful, and definitely one of my favorite, and emphasizes the importance of communication during a transition, during an unlearning, during a relearning in an organization, because it's saying, how do we use our words? How do we use our conversations? How do we use communication to help fuel people? There's such interesting research around how praise actually is almost equated in the brain to giving people money. That's why a lot of organizations can get away with not giving people raises or giving people bonuses for performing really well, because it's the praise that they give them. We all just want to be acknowledged around the things that we're doing well, especially if they align really well to the organization's vision. The more we can praise that, they say what gets praised or what gets appreciated gets repeated. And when people see that consistent praise, they go, oh, that's the behavior we're encouraging. And it sort of moves them, although gradually, but it does eventually move them towards the desired result that you want to see as a leader. And then the last one is participation. There was some interesting research done at Colorado State University. They were looking at understanding what's the biggest driver of change. What's the one thing that helps people if everything else was, gone to naught altogether, and there was just one metric we had to rely on. or one thing we had to rely on to help people make the behavior changes that really, really count. And what they found, and maybe let me just go back a little bit here, one of the things that they looked at was those signs that you see in your bathroom when you go to a hotel or a motel or a B&B, that sign that says, if you're not going to use your towel, throw it on the floor. If you're going to reuse your towel, hang it up. And then they compared signs like that to a sign that would say something like, for example, 80% of the people that used room 402, which is the room that you are in, actually hung their towels if they were going to use them again and threw them on the floor when they weren't going to. And what they found with looking at data like that is that people would actually change their behaviors that much more if they understand that they're a part of a group that's changing. And so if I know, John, that I'm a part of an organization that everyone in my team is making the exact same change and I'm not alone, I've got a higher chance of making a behavior change that feels extremely uncomfortable than when I don't feel like I belong to a tribe. And so that's the LEAP framework. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there is a resource, a free resource that I have on the link on my Instagram bio that just outlines that process a little bit for anyone who wants to dig into it. And it is called the LEAP framework, LEAP. And yeah, I hope that was helpful in some way. That was very long. I just realized just how long that was, but I hope it was helpful.
That was brilliant, Zanele. It resonated a lot, and really some very, very practical tips and tools. We'll have a deeper dive and a bigger read into that. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Zanele. We have about 10 minutes left, Jessica. I have a feeling that my question might take us over the 10-minute mark. Um, Anybody is someone in the audience have a question? Or Mello or John before I put my question out? So Nelly, I wanted to, before we leave today, I have like a gazillion questions, but I think the one I really want to zone in on is before we leave today, I'd love for you to connect that unlearning piece, the self-disrupting with better conversations. Um, where I'm thinking about specifically is um, how we have conversations with other people and to make those better with a frame of unlearning or self-disrupting. Any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Keita. So the one that does come to mind, and we've touched on this a little bit during our conversation, is leading with openness and the keenness to be challenged. And this, I think, is, it's not easy to come up with because often most of us listen to respond when we have conversations with people. But an unlearning way of looking at things or perception would be one where we say, I'm coming into this conversation because I'm coming really to do learning. I'm coming to learn in this conversation, regardless of who I'm listening to. Because I think sometimes we come into a conversation with this idea that, okay, we've already framed or put the person we're speaking to in some kind of box. Okay, younger than me. Okay, a little less qualified. Or, okay, this race or whatever it is, we've put them in a box. And already, and these are our biases, and already that box is telling us how to respond to that person, what to learn from them and what not to learn. And so we're almost replicating the way that we've always responded. And so I would definitely say that the way that unlearning could mesh into better conversations for us is just coming into conversations with an openness to say, what can I take away? If there's one thing, and just make it super practical. Every single time you go into a conversation now, what's one thing? Whether you are speaking, whether you are going to be positioned as the perceived experts in whatever context, come into a conversation with going, what can I learn from this conversation? What's one thing that is just going to make me go, oh my goodness, or give me an aha moment in this conversation? And I can definitely say already from being in this room, I have picked up some stuff because every single conversation needs to leave us changed, regardless of who we're speaking to. We need to have some form of change. And this, just to end off now, reminds me of the correlation that's been found by neuroscience now between Alzheimer's and a brain that isn't flexibly, consistently changing. Because if we don't put little measures in our day-to-day lives that are going to help us to constantly create those changes, then we are going to find ourselves drawing back. I often ask people, how long has your bedroom or your living room been in the same setup? And I often get answers like 10 years, 5 years. And I go, exactly. How can we ever expect ourselves to come into conversations with a new perspective, to learn something, to be challenged, if we ourselves don't put in the measures to challenge ourselves and to at least be a little bit confused about where the pot plant is today and where this is, and brushing your teeth with another hand, and all of those little things that help us to come into conversations just with a little bit more openness and knowing that we're not the all-knowing God. I call this the elusive sage stage, where you come in and you go, oh, I know exactly what's to be said. But coming in with a perception of let's co-create, because that's what conversations are to me. They're an opportunity to co-create, where you bring what you have and I bring what I have, and we see what kind of cocktail we can sort of mix together. So that's what I would say the connection is, leading with openness and keenness to be challenged. Thanks for the question, Keita.
If you kept changing where you put in knives and forks, I would get very frustrated with you on a regular basis.
Me too.
There's some pieces of my life that I want to be very predictable, but I love that challenge. Um, Jess, any questions or comments for you as we come to the top of the hour?
Um, Comments are really just wow. Thank you so much. I have learned and unlearned and relearned so many things already in this last hour. I came in with a curiosity of what do I need to unlearn in order to have better conversations myself? And I was reflecting a lot on that prior to this conversation. And I think I'm leaving with more questions around more things that I want to unlearn, but also what I want to relearn. And um, I just so much appreciate not just the frameworks and the knowledge and the insights that you bring, but the way that you weave it together so beautifully. And like, I just, wow, I feel like I could listen to you talk forever. Thank you so much. And Mello and John, thanks for those questions. They were both so different yet similar in so many ways. And Zanele, that LEAP framework. Can you remind people where they can get in touch, where they can find your work if they want to follow up? Obviously, they can click on your profile, but is there anything in particular you'd like to point everyone's attention to who would like to learn more?
Thank you, Jessica. It really has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. It always seems so short. So thank you very much for having me in the Better Conversations Club. So the best way would be my website, zanelenjapha.com, or LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. And the other option that might be a little bit easier for everyone right now is Instagram. If you just head over to my Instagram, that is in my bio, it's linked to my bio, you can connect with me there. And the LEAP framework, like you spoke about, Jessica, is there is a guide that I have. I call it a cheat sheet. It's called Hack Your Transition for people who are unlearning and relearning. If you go over to my bio, there's a link in there and you can download the Hack Your Transitions guide on that link, and that will give you a bit of insight into the LEAP framework. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Melo and John, for your questions too.
Amazing. So, I'll be heading over to your bio as soon as this is over. And I love what you left us off with, that question of, especially on Clubhouse, because we're constantly bouncing in and out of listening to conversations and going into those conversations with that question in our mind of what's that one thing I can learn from this conversation, I think is such a beautiful seed to plant. So, thanks for that. And Keita, I'll hand the mic over to you because you always do a beautiful job at counting us down. And it's become a bit of an ongoing joke now that we never seem to be able to get this countdown in sync. So let's see what we can do today on this Friday, synchronizing our self compassionate self destruction of the room. Keita, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Jessica. So what I'd like to do is ask everybody on stage to unmute your mic as we compassionately close the room. We're going to count down from 5 to 1, and then we're going to compassionately close our room. So I'll start and I'll count down from 5 to 1. So if I can get each of you to join me. And we
Mm-hmm.
start with 5,
5,
4.
4,
4,
I think you do it on
3,
purpose.
3,
2,
2,
2,
2, 1.
1.
1.
1.
Have a great weekend,
Have a great
everybody.
weekend, everybody.
Bye,
Zanele, thank you
everyone.
so
Cheers.
much. Bye, guys.
Bye.